Hello and welcome to week 3 of NMP 600 Foundations of Nonprofit Management. This week we are going to be talking about, as you can see, ethics, values, and accountability. And I'd like to remind you that since we're past week 2, we're actually 1/4 of the way through our class. So congratulations. Congratulations indeed. There were great conversations in the forums this past week, so let's try to keep it up this week as we enter into the topic of ethics, values, accountability, and transparency. As always, this Tegrity recording will provide you with some information, contextual information, to help guide your reading for the week and perhaps cause you to think a little more deeply about the topic of ethics this week. We're going to start off with this cartoon. Which is really just a simple way of talking about, you can see here that the ethics office is being easily duped, as it were. And I'd like to start off with a quote from Tom Jevons, which is one of the readings that you have for this week. And he talks about reflecting critically and actively on ethical issues is an obligation of every professional, including non-profit managers, he says. And concern for the ethical content or implications of one's decisions and actions is salient in every aspect of professional practice. End quote. So this is all the more important given that the survival and ability of nonprofits to carry out their mission really depends on their moral standing and their integrity, because there is an implicit social contract that nonprofits have to operate in the service to the public good, which allows the nonprofit to function within our society. So you might wonder, ask yourself, what are ethics? And you might wonder what that means, and perhaps even have the response that this topic may be too philosophical for your taste. But just take a moment and take a look at these 3 definitions of ethics coming from very different places. The first comes from the Institute for Global Ethics, the study of standards of right and wrong behavior. So that's pretty straightforward. The second, which is perhaps a little more philosophical, comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, that it is the ordinance of reason for the common good, made by him who has care of the community. So there again, there's that, the common good issue. And third, from the definition by Gene Temple, that ethics are actions that meet the expectations of your constituents. Now that's perhaps a more simple and pragmatic definition, but nevertheless, all 3 really relate to how we behave, how do they expect us to act as nonprofits in order to meet the standard of carrying forward our mission to act in the public good. The role of the nonprofit sector, really, the most significant one is to assume the public trust, and that is important, very, very important, because those who assume the public trust must hold themselves to a higher set of standards. This comes from Obedience to the Unenforceable, as you can see, which is one of your readings this week in the supplementary section. I think we can all agree that, as we talked about last week, that it's inherent in the very mission of nonprofits that that their mission is of a moral nature, and that because of that, that we are held to ethical standards of the highest level, and that we should hold ourselves to those same high standards. Again, from that article, Obedience to the Unenforceable, we cannot stress enough the importance of ethical standards in the nonprofit sector. The public trust, as you can see here, this quote is really important. The public trust is the most important asset of the nonprofit and philanthropic community. Donors give to and volunteers get involved with charitable organizations because they trust them to carry out their missions, to be good stewards of their resources, and to act according to the highest ethical standards. Most fundamentally, voluntary and philanthropic organizations abide by the highest ethical standards because it is the right thing to do. Often, I think, it is easy to take the easy way out, and we will talk about that in just a few moments in terms of some of the organizations which are hitting the public eye right at the moment. But we need to always remind ourselves as nonprofit leaders that we need to hold ourselves to a higher moral standard. I like to call it the New York Times test, and that simply means would you ask yourself always, would you want your decision or your action to be published on the front page of the New York Times? And if you have a question as to whether or not the answer is yes or no, if the answer is not yes, I would be very comfortable with having it published on the front page of the New York Times, then perhaps you need to go back and re-examine that decision or that action and see where your ethical question is. So, again, from the independent sector, there are this statement of ethical beliefs, and you can see them in front of you. They're what we've just been talking about. There's a commitment beyond self. There is an obedience not only to the laws, but a commitment beyond the law. A commitment to the public good and respect for the worth and the dignity of individuals, tolerance, diversity, and social justice. Once again, there's accountability to the public, open and honesty, or in other words, transparency, and the prudent application of resources. For those of you who are currently working in the nonprofit sector, it might be interesting for you to bring a copy of this statement of ethical beliefs to your next staff meeting and perhaps have a brief discussion with your fellow staff about their commitment to this high level of ethical standards. So I talked just a few moments ago about some nonprofits who are being scrutinized in the public eye, as it were, with bad publicity for bad decisions or conflict of interest. But in every case, nonprofits who are hit by this bad publicity are really more fragile to public scrutiny than their for-profit counterparts simply because that public trust is our most valuable asset. Think to yourself about Lance Armstrong, for example, or veterans charities that have recently come under scrutiny. These kinds of bad publicity hurt all nonprofits when they happen. You take a look at, there are some articles about this type of bad publicity in your supplementary materials this week as resources. The type of bad publicity, for example, that recently engulfed the Cleveland Museum of Art and Case Western Reserve University can pose a greater threat to such nonprofit organizations than their for-profit counterparts, simply because of the nonprofit's dependence on donors and the public's goodwill. Nonprofit advisors will always come back to the goodwill as being your most valuable assets. This chart you will also find among the supplemental materials this week. It is talking about the level of confidence which the public says they feel in charitable organizations. This particular chart is from 2002 to 2008. You can see the general confidence in charitable organizations appeared to hit its modern low point in 2003, and it really hasn't moved up or down significantly since. Although there was a slight increase in confidence in the July 2006 survey, it is very close to the margin of error, and therefore it should really be discounted. As this table shows, the level of confidence has varied between a low point of negative 37% in September of 2002 and a high point of 29% in July of 2006. As of March 2008, 34% of Americans said they had not too much confidence or none at all. And those are kind of scary numbers if you think about them. The considerable drop in the ratings of helping people poses a serious challenge to the sector's distinctiveness as a destination for giving or for volunteering. As of October 2003, 34%, as I said, of Americans said charitable organizations did very good in helping people. In March 2008, only 25% gave that same rating. This statistically significant drop is really the most troubling finding of all, and this supports the legitimacy challenge that you read about in our very first week in the Salomon Chapter 1. Again, from the Confidence in Charitable Performance, some more data which shows the fluctuation of ratings of nonprofits as the public feels that whether or not they are doing a good job within the parameters of certain tasks. You see those on the right-hand side of the chart. Spending money wisely, running programs and services, helping people, and finally being fair in decisions. And these are actually some troubling numbers. One of the questions that can be brought to light, however, is the ratings system itself, and how are these grades calculated, which therefore result partially in this low level of public confidence. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time discussing specific ethical issues. I have a few remarks, so this is perhaps a little more lengthy than I would like, but nevertheless this is a very important topic, so just hang in there. The first, of course, is accountability and transparency. Nonprofits and particularly 501c3 organizations are first and foremost obligated to adhere to stringent financial reporting requirements, in particular those that regard financial disclosure, concerning fundraising costs and proceeds. A key issue is the disclosure of fundraising costs at the point of solicitation. Leaders in the field are also looking beyond the letter of the law to a broader definition of accountability with respect to advancing the mission through every aspect of the nonprofit's operation, including issues such as allocation of resources toward program growth and management or capacity building. A number of proposed reforms center on the issue of nonprofit performance and developing a meaningful standard for measuring outcomes, and we will talk about measurement in a few weeks. Some nonprofit leaders are calling for the creation of an oversight agency for nonprofits that would monitor all aspects of performance in much the same way that the SEC does for publicly traded corporations. As the Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance put it in the wake of 9/11, quote, how recipient organizations spend these funds, their success in addressing both immediate and longer-term needs, and perhaps most of all, their willingness to make prompt public disclosure of these activities will strongly impact future charitable giving. Donors want to support charities, but this desire is coupled with high expectations for charity accountability, end quote. Now, some thinkers argue for complete openness to public scrutiny as the ideal standard for nonprofit organizations in order to build and maintain public trust. Since nonprofit organizations come out of a populist democratic tradition in American culture, as we've learned in the first 2 weeks of this class, it could be argued that they really ought to operate in an open and democratic manner to represent and further that tradition. And this would include answering to supporters, members, board, donors, and in some cases the broader public for their decisions regarding the means of raising and allocating resources. Harvard Business School professor Regina Hurlizer suggests that in order to, quote, lift the veil of secrecy under which many nonprofits operate, they should increase the disclosure, analysis, and dissemination of information on the performance and apply sanction against those that do not comply with these requirements. There are several issues, moving on to the second topic, there are several issues surrounding compensation and performance-based pay. The first of which is executive compensation. There are ethical as well as legal prohibitions against excessive executive compensation. However, different types of nonprofits can vary widely in what is considered an appropriate wage for a given position. For example, organizations that operate on foundation and government grants may have lower pay scales than those that operate on fees or individual donations. Another factor can be competitive market pay rates, as exists, for example, in the healthcare industry. If the compensation is clearly stated and fully disclosed, as well as clearly delineated as to the source, its ethics is more readily ensured. A related issue is setting pay based on the ability to generate income or growth versus mission advancement. Now, while merit-based pay that employs financial rewards to motivate employees to achieve goals is widely accepted in the business world, there are concerns in the nonprofit arena that such approaches will lead to abuse of clients, of funders, and will, in essence, divert attention away from the very mission of the organization. A second issue under compensation is fundraiser compensation. Now, accepting payment as a percentage of money raised is really frowned upon because of the belief that this practice promotes unethical solicitation and leads fundraisers to exaggerate facts or minimize the disclosure or harass or intimidate potential donors. Fundraising consultants and companies who work for a percentage of proceeds are sometimes willing to front all or part of the fundraising expenses, or attempt to control the disbursement of funds on behalf of the nonprofit. All of these signal potential ethical violations. Another area are speaker fees and outside income, and there are different philosophies concerning whether speaking and outside consulting fees for related professional activity belong to the individual or to the organization that he or she represents. So each organization should establish policies and be very clear on their stance on this issue. So moving on, the ratio of fundraising expenses to program costs. The percentages of charitable proceeds that can be used for fundraising, that's what this is talking about. One standard range is from 20 to 35%. Stated another way, sorry about that. You just heard a little bit from my dog Georgia, who you see in the photograph there. She's a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and she feels very strongly about these ethical issues, so she decided to chime in. My apologies. We were talking about the standard of fundraising expenses to program costs, and one standard we were discussing was 20 to 35%. And stated another way, nonprofit organizations would be spending at least 3 times what it spends on programming for what it spends on fundraising. This is according to the Maryland Association standards. And these standards will vary from organization to organization and from within their capabilities. Several new services have emerged that attempt to track and evaluate various charities' fundraising overhead as an indicator of performance and quality. These include, and I'm sure you've heard of them, Charity Navigator, National Charities Information Bureau, the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, and the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, among others. Misrepresentation. Now, nonprofits are sometimes called to task for their communication strategies, in particular the language and the images they use to solicit funds. Of particular concern are the use of representational images that may mislead donors as to the actual recipients of the donor's giving, or overstating or inflating the organization's accomplishments, or marketing the most appealing and compelling program areas to donors when in fact those areas may be fully funded and the donor's dollars are likely to be applied elsewhere. An example of that would be the donations made to the Red Cross following 9/11. Which once that initiative was fully funded, some of those donations were rerouted to other programs. Now, while these are not illegal practices, many nonprofits have well-defined policies about the use of representational images and the designation of funds to ensure the integrity of their communication and to help protect potential donors from possible exploitation. Conflicts of interest. There is always the potential for organization insiders, in particular board members and or staff, to divert resources to private interest, granting of favors, for example, steering business to a colleague or a relative, engaging in quid pro quo behavior with outside vendors. These are examples of what I'm talking about. In light of their obligations to, quote, exercise independent judgment solely on behalf of the organization, board members, staff, and volunteers should sign a statement annually and disclose actual and potential conflicts of interest, end quote. Again, that is from the Maryland Association of Certification Standards. To allow them to accept needed services from board members and friends, some organizations have policies regarding these conflict of interests, and and how board members might recuse themselves, for example, from voting on issues in which they may have a personal interest. Accumulation of surpluses. While it is important to develop a cushion against the natural fluctuations in funding and demand that all nonprofits encounter, the accumulation of large surpluses of cash from charitable donations is a controversial practice. The Wise Giving Alliance holds that surpluses should be held to 3 times the current year's expenses or the next year's budget, whichever is greater. Some even recommend that donors be informed if a major purpose of a solicitation is specifically to build surplus. Some donor advisors will tell donors to look at asset reserves to evaluate the health of a nonprofit to which they're considering donating. Yet at the same time, they warn those same donors that maintaining 1 to 3 years' worth of revenues is health, but more may be a sign that the group is stockpiling money rather than spending it on mission-related programs. Self-aggrandizement. Nonprofit organizations are frequently called to task for establishing large endowments, undertaking large capital investments, embarking on aggressive expansion strategies, or overcompensating staff on the ground that they are in fact engaged in aggrandizing and perpetuating themselves at the expense of the people they were created to serve. Tom Jevons cites the PTL scandal of the 1980s and the United Way scandal of the 1990s as examples of this extreme misappropriation of funds for personal aggrandizement. Even in the absence of outright misappropriation or malfeasance, the nonprofits are expected to live up to a broader definition of responsible stewardship. According to the Obedience to the Unenforceable article, quote, making the contributor's dollar go as far as possible for the client and the cause, end quote. And finally, workplace values. Think about this. Should nonprofit organizations should also be held to a higher standard than for-profit businesses with respect to the work environment? They are subject to the same laws regarding fair hiring practices, workplace conduct, family leave, and similar issues, but should they strive to provide a better environment with respect to work-family balance, stress management, interpersonal relations, and other human values that they themselves seek to instill in the outside world? Is it possible to do so when you have limited resources and a rising need produces pressures that can burn out even the most dedicated employees? Something to think about there. Sorry for the length of that, but these ethical questions are really critical. So that's why we're going to be spending an entire week talking about these issues of values, ethics, and accountability. One of our discussion forums this week will, in point of fact, be related to a discussion that you will have surrounding a specific case study. And how you feel about the actions of the board in this particular case study, how you would act. So it will be interesting. And I'll be talking about those discussion forums in just a moment. So, looking ahead here in week 3, this is going to be an intense week with many important discussions and assignments, and I would ask that you please take the opportunity to very carefully plan your time this week, as I know you do every week, but in particular this week, so that you will have ample time to accomplish these important tasks. Time management will be crucial to your success this week. In addition to this week's assignments, you will be required to have a 20-minute phone conversation with Professor Jeff Grime, who for most of you is your advisor. He is, as you also know, the director of the NMP and SFP programs, and will serve as your advisor to most of you during your time here in the program. He will be speaking with you not only about your goals while you're here in the program, but he will answer any questions that you might have specifically about the degree requirements. In preparation for the call, a couple of things. One, there in the Week 3 module, you will find his cell phone number. Either give him a call or send him an email or sign up for one of the times, and then call him at the appropriate time. And also, in preparation for that call, please take a look at the degree requirements for your specific program. You will find those in the advising materials folder. And we're asking that you fill out the appropriate advising sheet. And one of the assignment requirements for this week is that you submit a completed advising sheet following your call with Jeff. There's a sign-up page in the Week 3 module for available times. As I said, to speak with Jeff, please sign up for a time in the same way that you signed up for one to speak with me last week. Let me know right away if you're having difficulty accessing the sign-up sheet, or if for some reason you are unable to speak with Jeff at one of the assigned times. So that's a very important part of this week's work. The assignment, the SBA assignment for this week, is a very important one. This week you will be writing your life purpose essay. Specific instructions, including a questionnaire, which is really simply meant to spur your thinking in preparation for writing the life purpose essay. These instructions and the questionnaire will be found in the Week 3 module. The assignment is really for you to write an essay. It is not meant to be to list the questions and simply answer them. I want you to please take the time to really reflect before you begin to write. This is a critically important essay. It will become a key part of your final e-portfolio, which is required of you at the end of the NMP program. One of the main purposes of the program is to ask that you think about yourself as a leader, and to assess what leadership style will be most comfortable for you, and to begin to lead you to that self-assessment. And this essay is a critical step forward in that process. Please don't take it lightly, and don't wait until late in the week to start it. It really will require more time of you than that. Remember your APA format requirements, which include a separate title page, running head, a separate reference page, and parenthetical in-text citations. All of that is critically important. Take the time to do a rough draft and submit it to Smart Thinking for their feedback, and then make revisions. Really take the time to do it well. It's that important. And finally, the discussion forums. This week we will, as you know by now, we'll be discussing ethics, accountability, and transparency, and the discussion forum questions will all be related to this issue. One specifically to a case study that you will find in the required readings folder. I ask that you please don't focus only on the case study. The key here is to relate the case study and the questions, the discussion forum questions, to your other required readings for the week. Please take the time to think very deeply about the readings and the case study, and take your discussions to the next level of thought. Don't simply repeat the basics from your readings. Your discussions will be richer, and you will learn more from each other if you do this. One quick note. Please do, as we move forward, try to limit your initial post to 250 words or less. This will help you to begin to write concisely. It will also help everyone else who needs to read all of the posts to manage their time a little better. Also remember, those APA parenthetical citations, in-text citations, are a requirement of these discussion forum posts. So please take another look and see how they are done correctly. One final note. I promise you, because of the topic this week, that these discussion forums will be lively. These topics bring out everyone's passion to do the right thing, and it is certainly okay to disagree and debate, but please remember to do so politely. I know that you will. Support your position, whatever it may be, from this week's readings, and do learn from one another. I know that I look forward to learning from all of you. I hope you will call or email me with questions, and I look forward to seeing you or hearing from you online in the discussion forums. Thanks so much. I'm learning a lot from you all. Thanks.